So I did about an hour-long video on this whistleblower slash Ukraine situation and then a 2-hour live stream on it. But what I really want to do is I understand a lot of people don't have that amount of time to go through it. So I want to just give a summary of the events as we know them right now. And I'll link those other two videos and the articles I'll be referencing so you can check out and do a more in-depth analysis of yourself. But I just wanted to give a short summary of what we know so far. The scandal of Trump is this. Supposedly someone in the intelligence community overheard one of Trump's phone calls with a foreign leader. We now think that was with the president of the Ukraine. This phone call apparently promised something to that leader of the Ukraine. We don't know what that is, but the media's gone crazy saying that if Trump was offering some sort of aid or some sort of money, and what they assume's going on is that it's into allegations of Joe Biden's son being under a criminal investigation back in 2015 in the Ukraine. What this story was this. You had a former president of the Ukraine that was connected to Russia, was sympathetic towards Russia, and there was a revolution where he was overthrown. One of his sidekicks basically was this guy named Zlochevsky. Zlochevsky was accused of all sorts of corruption, laundering money through all sorts of criminal enterprises, and he owned the largest gas company in the Ukraine. That gas company then hired Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, to be on its board of directors. So there was an investigation going on to this. Now, the person who was a head prosecutor was the name of Shokin, and he was supposedly looking into this case. However, Joe Biden brags in 2018 that he went to the Ukraine and talked to their leaders and had a $1 billion loan to offer them, but said that Obama basically gave him permission to not give that loan unless they fired this prosecutor. In Biden's defense, he claims, and a bunch of other people, that this prosecutor was corrupt and wasn't really investigating corruption cases whatsoever, and so that's why they wanted him out. However, the story is still, this was the lead prosecutor that was looking into Joe Biden's son. The offer worked, the man was fired, the $1 billion was sent, and eventually the story got buried, and the investigation into the firm that Joe Biden's son worked for just kind of disappeared. So that's the story as we know it. The important things to remember are this. With the details of this, which again, I give the details more thoroughly in the other two videos. If you have the time, I really recommend watching them because it's a fascinating story. But the details aren't as important as this. Ask yourself this. If any politician, a high-level politician, president, vice president, secretary of state, or something of that, had tax dollars, $1 billion in tax money that they were threatening to withhold to a foreign country unless that foreign country fired a prosecutor, and that prosecutor happened to be looking at that politician's son, that is incredibly shady and reason for an investigation. Not only was there not an investigation done by the U.S. Congress or anyone in the U.S. intelligence community, but there also was no thorough investigation done by the media at the time. In fact, all the media, even those defending Joe Biden today, are admitting that this was an incredible conflict of interest where Joe Biden was supposedly trying to root out corruption in the Ukraine, but his son was working for one of the very corrupt oligarchs they were trying to root out. And in fact, this was also going on in China, where Joe Biden's son had business deals in China with shady people. And Joe Biden, at the exact same time, Joe Biden was the point man for China, trying to get good deals passed in the United States for China. So ask yourself, if it was Donald Trump and we said, hey, Trump's son was working for this corrupt oligarch in Russia, and Trump offered Russia $1 billion to fire the prosecutor that just happened to be looking into his son's company, everyone would go nuts, rightfully so, and there would be a huge investigation, as there should be. Trump would have already been impeached. There would be Pulitzer Prizes given out because the media would be working so hard. But instead, because it was Joe Biden, and keep in mind, this happened in 2015. There were a couple stories ran on it in the New York Times, but that's about it. So this went largely uncovered. Now, one of the arguments that Democrats are trying to make, people that aren't necessarily Biden fans but are Democrats, is, well, that's fine. If it burns Biden down, so be it. But it's not that simple. The real story to me, of course, is Biden's Obama administration corruption. And remember, Biden admitted in his own statement that, call Obama, he gave me permission to do this. So it's not just their corruption, it's also the corruption of the Democratic Party in general and the media, who have known of this story for 4 years and are doing everything they can to cover it up. They're not demanding investigations, and the journalists aren't doing anything to look into it. They're all trying to cover for Biden. But we know that if it was Trump, it would be different. Here's why. Two examples. One, the accusation that they're making at Trump that maybe he offered some sort of aid for the Ukraine's legal system to do something that benefits Trump We don't know that that's what's occurred, but that's what's being alleged by the media and the Democrats. We know for a fact that's exactly what Joe Biden did. So with Trump, it's a big story without even knowing the facts. Just on complete hearsay. No one knows. No one knows what this whistleblower alleged. But they're still saying, oh, this is a huge deal. It could be grounds for impeachment. It's a huge scandal. With Biden, we know the facts from Biden's own mouth, and not a word. And let's not forget, the reason that the media and the Democrats have been after Trump's tax returns, which I've said is bogus the entire time, because they want to say, if we find out that Trump had any kind of business dealings in Russia, that somehow proves corruption. But why? The Mueller investigation proved that there was no Russia collusion story. He said that neither Trump nor anyone connected to him illegally conspired with Russia in any way whatsoever. And so, not only do they not have proof that Trump had business dealings in Russia, but they have no proof, even if there were dealings in Russia, how that's somehow illegitimate or means that that affected his policy towards Russia. They try to make the claim that Trump's soft on Russia, that must be because he owes Russia something or has businesses there. But it ignores, we don't even have proof that Trump does have businesses in Russia, and it ignores the fact that actually Trump's been very hard on Russia, much more hard than Obama. In fact, the number one thing against Russia that Trump did was open up for more domestic drilling in the United States so that we're now a net exporter, one of the biggest in the world, of fossil fuels, which harms Russia because that's their big export. But they're trying to say, if Trump has a business there, and if we think Trump's policies towards Russia has been favorable, that proves the link. And that's been the big story for 3 years. That's what Rachel Maddow foams at the mouth about every night, and all these Democrats. That's what all the hearings and wanting all the tax returns are about. Where here we actually have Joe Biden's son being investigated by a prosecutor that he threatens to withhold $1 billion until that prosecutor gets fired. So you know, based on how the media has treated the Trump-Russia situation, that they would go absolutely insane if this was Trump and Don Jr. instead of Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. Now, let's talk about the defense that some of the articles and people have been giving of Joe Biden. They basically make two defenses. The first is that Shokin actually, and that's the prosecutor that was fired, actually was not looking in, wasn't doing his job and wasn't looking into Hunter Biden at the time. But John Solomon at The Hill reports that he actually looked at documents from Shokin's time as prosecutor that was given to him by senior Ukrainian officials that show that Shokin did identify Hunter Biden as a potential target for the investigation. Now, in the defense, the deputy prosecutor has said, no, we weren't really, the case had stalled out. Shokin wasn't doing anything. But Shokin himself says that's not true. I had specific plans set forth to have interrogations, other sorts of investigations that were going to be going on. We don't know the truth. This defense is irrelevant for two reasons. One, it doesn't matter because it's just hearsay. We don't have one definitive proof one way or the other of what was going on. If there's any chance that this guy was looking into Biden's son, it's a terrible story. And second, Biden had no idea what the status of the investigation into his son was. All Joe Biden would have known at the time is, I know there's my company's involved in this company. I know that the head of it's this corrupt oligarch and we're looking into all of it. The Ukrainian government's looking into all of his companies. And I know that this is the lead prosecutor in the Ukraine that's in charge, at least on paper, of looking into these investigations. Joe Biden would have had no knowledge how that investigation was proceeding. If he did, that's a scandal of epic proportions in itself. That the legal system in Ukraine, the head prosecutor or people in that office were telling Joe Biden, here's the status of the investigation into your son's company. That's incredibly unethical and shady. No one's alleging that. No one's alleging Joe Biden had any inside information. In fact, they're alleging the opposite. He basically knew nothing. So if he knew on paper this was the person in charge with investigating his son for potential crimes, why wouldn't he then want that person off? Particularly then when the investigation then gets kicked to, it's the acronym is NABU, but it's connected to the U.S. Embassy and the embassy businesses in Kiev, which means that Joe Biden and the Obama administration were closer connected to the agency that it got kicked off to. And remember, no matter what they say, because they'll say, oh, it wasn't being looked into. The investigations weren't actually ever completed after it got kicked off to this agency. So if it's true that they weren't being looked at before, they certainly weren't being looked at after. Remember, it doesn't matter, it's just hearsay. Some people are saying the investigation was completely stalled. Some people are saying that it was going forward. We know on paper it was open. We know the guy that was in charge, his name was Shokin. Biden knew that, and that's all Biden knew, and he demanded this person be fired. The second defense is this. It's that actually Biden was right to want Shokin fired because Shokin was corrupt. and he was inept, and he wasn't prosecuting all sorts of corruption that was going on in Ukraine, including against Burisma, the company that we're talking about that Biden's son worked for, and its owner Zlochevsky. But there's problems with that as well. One, all the people that are making this argument that are saying, oh, we should have withheld that $1 billion until this guy was fired, Obama and Biden did the right thing, they ignore the fact that even once this guy was fired, no one went after Zlochevsky anyways. So it clearly wasn't this guy that was specifically the problem, because they said if we get rid of this guy, things will be better. So they get rid of the guy and nothing happens. In fact, they ended up burying at one point, one of the big investigations, they accidentally forgot to file paperwork in time. Isn't that convenient? You get rid of the prosecutor looking into Joe Biden's son, and then the follow-up people they kick it to, whoops, we forgot to file paperwork in time. Oh well, case dismissed. Pretty convenient, don't you think? And the other thing is, it doesn't matter what other people are saying. Do you think they would give Trump or any other conservative politician the benefit of the doubt? So imagine that there are prosecutors looking into Trump or to Trump's children or something like that. Let's say, imagine someone like, I don't know, Bob Mueller. Would it have been legitimate for Trump to fire Mueller and then say, well, actually, here's a dozen people that will tell you how corrupt Mueller was when he was the head of the FBI and how corrupt he was handling this current investigation and all these other things that he's done is terrible, so he should be fired for other reasons. Do you think people would be okay with that? No, they'd flip out. They would say, this proves this is reason for impeachment. Trump fired the guy that was directly looking into him. It wouldn't matter how many people said, whether they from, journalists or whether they're politicians or people that know a lot about international politics in Europe and things like that, because that's who all these people that all these articles that I'll link are quoting. Christine Lagarde from the IMF and this person that works at the Atlantic Council. By the way, all establishment type people, but they're all saying, yes, this Shokin guy was terrible. He needed out of there. That's still not reason to not investigate Joe Biden firing the person who on paper was in charge with looking into his son's company to see if they committed crimes. It wouldn't fly with any conservative politician. Now, there are also articles like the Intercept article where you have a woman in the Ukraine who's saying, I'm one of the people that investigates anti-corruption in the Ukraine, and I'm sick and tired of the conspiracy theory that he was fired because he was investigating Joe Biden's son. That's not true. He was fired because he was corrupt. And there's a lot of people that are saying things like that. That is wrong. We know why this gentleman was fired. Because Joe Biden admitted in his 2018 speech, he said that he was in talks to get this guy fired for corruption. And when he shows up to actually give the $1 billion, they still hadn't fired him. So he says, I'm leaving in 6 hours. You're not getting your money unless you fire him. The Ukrainians say, you're not the president. You can't make that decision. And he says, call Obama and see what he says. I'm out in 6 hours. And then they fired the guy. Now, if they were going to fire him in the Ukraine for other reasons, they would have done so. And they wouldn't have waited until they were going to lose $1 billion to do so. So the reason this gentleman was fired by the Ukraine was for $1 billion. It's that simple. Biden admits as much. He had to pressure them with this $1 billion to get them to fire. So that's the reason why they fired him. So the question is, why did Joe Biden want him fired? So you can have all the anti-corruption people you want in Ukraine saying, well, this guy was corrupt. That was the reason he was fired. No, that's the reason you wanted him fired. You don't know the reason Joe Biden wanted him fired. And we wouldn't accept any conservative politician, let alone Trump or someone like that's administration, saying, oh, trust me, just because they were looking into my son doesn't mean that's the reason I wanted him fired. There were other reasons. It's very simple. 20 years from now, I don't care if it's a Democrat or Republican. If you come up to me and you say, hey, did you hear that the vice president's son's working for a corrupt oligarch in Russia or the Ukraine or China or the UK? It doesn't matter. I'd say, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, and did you hear that the vice president threatened to withhold $1 billion from that country until they fired the prosecutor that just happened to be looking into his son? I would say, my God, that's a scandal of epic proportions. It needs to be investigated. Yet the media sat on this for 4 years and didn't do any thorough investigation. The administration, the Obama administration, didn't do any investigation into itself, clearly. The Democrats in Congress didn't call for any investigations. And to this day, when it's brought up because of this whistleblower complaint, everyone's acting like it's not a big story. It is. It's an enormous story. So, what we now are hearing is the Washington Post reported yesterday, and something that's very important, their insider that has knowledge of the phone call that the whistleblower was talking about said that there was no mention of military or financial aid to be given to Ukraine during that phone call. Therefore, there was no quid pro quo. The only way this is shady is if somehow Trump said, hey, Ukraine, I will give you money if you find Joe Biden guilty. That would be grounds for impeachment, because you're then saying it's conditional on them finding someone guilty. If he said, I'm withholding aid until you start an investigation, I can understand how people would think that's shady, but you have to understand there's currently an investigation in the United States into some of Joe Biden's associates that worked at that company with him and their financial situation. That investigation found that, in fact, there were payments going to Hunter Biden from this company of $5,000 to $25,000, sometimes several times a month, at least one time a month, and that money had never been properly investigated. The new prosecutor that took over for the Ukraine is a man by the name of Lutsenko. Joe Biden admits in his speech that this guy was, quote, solid. So the new prosecutor's solid. He didn't get to handle the case into Burisma, the company that Joe Biden's son worked for. But since Joe Biden made these statements in 2018, his office started re-examining this case. In their re-examination, they found that actually there were payments that went to Hunter Biden that were never properly investigated. And keep in mind, the reason they're investigating is it's alleged that they were basically, this company was funneling money, was cleaning dirty money. And so they have to look in to make sure that everyone that was getting massive payments from this place was on the up and up. It doesn't mean Hunter Biden's automatically guilty, but it's clearly warrants looking into these massive payments that he was getting. Especially when you consider Hunter Biden had no experience in the Ukraine or anything in a gas market or anything like that. So what's he doing to receive $25,000 a month, sometimes more? No one knows. Now, people will say, can you trust Lutsenko? One, isn't that ironic? Every prosecutor that comes in Ukraine that's going to be looked at Biden's son says, oh, you can't trust that guy, you can't trust that guy. You have to trust these others. And second, the fact is, Biden called him solid. The third thing is that the U.S. investigation I just mentioned actually found that there were payments going to Hunter Biden of the amounts I said. So that kind of backs up Lutsenko's story. So Lutsenko is on the record in the Hill article that I'll provide saying he actually wants to talk to the Attorney General, William Barr, about these funds that Hunter Biden was getting and about the external interference that Joe Biden played in the role of that investigation. So actually the head Ukrainian prosecutor wants to talk to the U.S., which I'll get to more in a second. So it's because this is a legitimate investigation that's going on. We actually see routinely where you have the United States give conditional aid. In other words, only give aid to a country if that country agrees to help with some sort of criminal or military situation that we have going on. So maybe it's, hey, we'll give you this money if you help us fight the Taliban or fight ISIS. Or, hey, we'll give you this money if you help give us information on this massive crime ring that we have going, etc. That's not uncommon. So it would be perfectly legitimate for Trump to ask for help in these sorts of investigations or help with evidence into criminal enterprises that are going on with conditional aid. Keep in mind, this is exactly what the Obama administration did, where they had people like Christopher Steele and agents of the UK and other places give evidence against Trump in what we now know was a bogus investigation. And it was more than, not only was it bogus, but they actually were using these foreign agents to help spy on Trump's campaign based on unverified information that they also got from foreign agents like Kremlin officials. So this is just a far less serious version of that. But now we're finding out that the Washington Post is reporting that actually this agent that listened, like I said there was no quid pro quo. So in other words, Trump just said, hey, we would like information you have on the least possible crimes. He didn't say, until you do that, we won't give you money or we won't give you military aid. That's what this person, the Washington Post, who hates Trump, that's what their insider who has knowledge of the phone call is saying. Again, we don't know. We'll have to see eventually what comes to. But if that's the case, this is a totally non-story. We have administrations all the time ask for information on criminal investigations. Remember, we had the Obama administration going out and talking to allies and asking all sorts of questions of foreign powers of whether or not, requesting information about people connected to Trump. That's not illegal for a president's office to do. Again, I've explained in all my videos why what the Obama administration did was uniquely worse, and it's actually the biggest political scandal in the history of the country. So it's a non-story from the get-go, if this Washington Post article is true. Then the second Hill article that I'll provide by John Solomon, the first one's from further back in the year. This one's just from yesterday, I believe. But it talks specifically about what's going on with this situation. So Rudy Giuliani went on Cuomo's show, and everyone's saying, oh, Giuliani made a fool of himself. All Giuliani said was he admitted that he asked the administration of the Ukraine to look into the crimes of Hunter Biden and whether or not Joe Biden interfered into the investigation. Everyone's making it sound like that's a big deal. But what this John Solomon article says is very interesting. It says that actually it was the Ukraine that was reaching out to the United States the entire time. And they couldn't get anyone, first, at the Department of Justice. For years they've been trying to do this. They couldn't get anyone to take them seriously. And second, they couldn't get anyone at the New York Attorney General's office. The New York Attorney General's office, again, is the one that's going after Trump, and it doesn't seem to really be interested in anything that's not ideologically directed at Trump. So they're constantly trying to give this evidence to investigators in the United States, and the United States says no one will listen in the United States. This furthers the idea that there are deep state people around Trump that aren't concerned about justice, and they don't want evidence getting out that the establishment Democrats under Barack Obama and Joe Biden and the media and the Democrats refuse to cover this corruption that have been going on since 2015. Now, you need to understand a little bit about the situation that's going on in the Ukraine right now. Ukraine had a president named Poroshenko that was kind of a traditional politician, but he was more in line with the Obama administration. Poroshenko ended up losing to a gentleman, Zelensky, I believe is his name, who was literally a stand-up comedian in the Ukraine. So he was just a TV personality. He ran on basically one issue, that the corruption in the Ukraine is disgusting and he would weed it out. He won on that message. So this isn't a career politician. This is a populist that was tired of corruption. He gets into office, and since 2018, he's been deeply concerned, apparently, about corruption that occurred with Joe Biden's son and Joe Biden interfering in their political system. Not only that, he's apparently also, according to this Hill article, trying to give evidence to the United States of the Democratic National Committee trying to interfere in the 2016 election by cooperating with people in the Ukrainian government illegitimately. So there's two things. Right now you have this guy that comes in, this populist guy who's interested in outing corruption, and he's trying to get in touch with investigators in the U.S. because he has evidence that, one, the Democrats were trying to illegally influence the election of the United States by working with Ukrainian government officials, and we know that this actually happened because those officials gave dirt on Paul Manafort, which was then used to smear Manafort and used as evidence to get him. That was people from the Democratic National Committee. Not investigators, not the FBI, but DNC people that were going to the Ukraine and meeting with government officials off the record to get this information and then smear Trump's campaign. The exact same thing that they accused Trump of doing, but they were never able to prove. So he has evidence of that, and he also has evidence of the shadiness of Hunter Biden being involved in this business with this shady oligarch, and that investigation never coming to completion, and Joe Biden improperly influencing that investigation. And so because they couldn't get a hold of people, the State Department decided to facilitate a trip with Rudy Giuliani to go over to the Ukraine and be able to meet with the new president of the Ukraine's top lawyer and have these two lawyers hash out exactly what was going on. But that was earlier this year, and evidence of that got out, and Giuliani canceled the trip at the last minute because it was being a bad news cycle for them. And so since then, there's kind of been this strenuous relationship where these Ukrainian people that have this information and these prosecutors are saying, we want to talk to people in the United States about these corruption allegations that we have and evidence of it. And so apparently then Trump's on the phone and he's telling the Ukrainian president, yes, give us that information. We would like that information very much. Some people say he said it as many as 8 times in one call. That's fine. He's just reassuring, if these reports are correct, a foreign leader that we do actually want this evidence of corruption, and that all these people in the State Department and at the DOJ and the New York Attorney General's office that refuse to accept that evidence don't speak for Trump. Now the Solomon article says that actually Ukraine's talking about setting up a parliamentary unit that would directly work with the United States Congress to send that evidence to Congress, since people in the State Department or in the Attorney General's office weren't accepting this evidence. By the way, this is more evidence of the possible shadiness of Barr, who let Comey off the hook even after he was referred for criminal prosecution. Now, for some reason, he's not taking evidence of corruption of the Biden-Obama administration that's trying to be given by Ukrainian president that's been duly elected. But that's where we sit right now. So, in summary, here's what, and again, I just want to reiterate, we don't know anything. Even that Solomon article that I'm talking to you about could not be true. We don't know. That's the problem with all this reporting on, oh, an anonymous person made some sort of allegation. Until the evidence comes out, we don't know. But here's what we do know. We know that the press is making a big deal of this, as is the Democrats, and they're claiming this somehow is impeachable or reason to remove Trump, or it's a very horrible scandal. But they have no idea what the specifics of the case are. But we do know the specifics of the Biden case. It doesn't matter. The two defenses, again, of, well, this prosecutor he wanted fired was really corrupt and he wasn't really looking into Biden anyways. That defense wouldn't fly for anyone else. These are the facts as we know them. Joe Biden's son's company was under investigation. Everyone, even the articles that are defending Joe Biden, are saying it was an enormous conflict of interest while Joe Biden was the point man in the Ukraine to be investigating corruption and trying to root out corruption, to have his son be working for one of the very corrupt oligarchs that he was supposed to be looking into and trying to get. In fact, he wanted this prosecutor fired allegedly because this prosecutor wasn't looking into this specific corrupt oligarch that his son was working for. Does that make any sense to you? Doesn't that seem like a huge conflict of interest? And conveniently, after that prosecutor's gone, no charges have been brought whatsoever against that same corrupt oligarch or Hunter Biden's son. Isn't that convenient? And the new prosecutor says, yeah, we have evidence that external influence stopped the investigation in its tracks. A guy that Joe Biden called solid. So again, not to get too confusing, and I know I talk really fast. You can slow me down, put in the speed thing, put 0.75 if you want. The story's very simple. We know that Joe Biden was working on weeding out corruption in Ukraine. We know his son was working for one of the most corrupt people, allegedly. Well, he was working, definitely, but corrupt, allegedly. The guy being corrupt, allegedly. We know that Joe Biden admits that he withheld $1 billion until they fired the prosecutor who happened to be the one leading the investigation into his son's company. Now, you could say, but he wasn't doing a good job at that investigation, but there were other reasons to fire him. It doesn't matter. None of that matters, because if it was done to a Republican, or if Trump would have been the person to do this, every single media outlet and every single Democrat and every single person that'll watch this video or that's responded to comments I've made in other places online that go, well, no, this guy was corrupt. Joe Biden wanted him fired because he was corrupt for other reasons, would be outraged if it was Trump. There would be no, well, wait a minute. Other people say that there were reasons to fire. Here's people from the Atlantic Council that say actually the prosecutor Trump wanted fired was really crappy. They wouldn't care. In fact, there were tons of people that said James Comey needed to be fired, including Rod Rosenstein, who wrote the memo. Has that stopped the Democrats or the media for saying Trump's firing of Comey was obstruction of justice, was somehow a crime? No. But we have tons of reasons that there would have been to fire Comey other than just this investigation. Remember, Comey said that he told Trump that he wasn't investigating Trump personally. So there were tons of reasons to fire him. Everyone, even the Democrats themselves, gave plenty of reasons. They were upset with his treatment of the Hillary Clinton situation. Yet they still scream investigation. That's what started the independent counsel, right? The firing of Comey. So why wasn't there a similar investigation when Joe Biden got the prosecutor that was looking at his son fired? So this proves that if it was Trump, these defenses wouldn't hold water. It doesn't matter. The optics of this are so terrible, no matter what. If you, as a senior politician in the United States, withhold $1 billion and make threats to withhold $1 billion of our tax money to a foreign country unless they fire the prosecutor that's looking into your son, saying, well, actually, he wasn't really doing a good job looking into my son, the investigation stalled, or actually, this guy was a really bad dude, aside from looking into my son, doesn't cut the mustard. There should have been an investigation. The real scandal is, it's now where it turns out that there's all kinds of other information coming out, that this whistleblower scandal might be a huge nothing, that actually there was no quid pro quo. Trump didn't offer anything of value to get something in return. He just tried to facilitate the gathering of evidence from the Ukrainian president, who's tired of the corruption and wants to give the U.S. evidence of corruption of Biden's son and Biden himself. And yet the media has been corrupt, and they act like what they don't know about the Trump situation and the whistleblower, because they don't have any of the facts, is a big deal. Yet for 4 years now, they've covered this Biden story up. By the way, the last thing I'll say about it is, it's funny because, again, if you look at these articles, all the ones defending Biden are saying over and over again, well, this was a really bad look for Biden regardless that his son worked for this corrupt oligarch, and it was a huge conflict of interest. But did they report that in 2014 and 15? No. This is always the way it goes with the corrupt media, because they're just mouthpieces for the Democratic Party. They allow scandals to occur while they are occurring, and then years down the road they go, yeah, that was bad, we should have reported on it, like Bill Clinton. So it does no good for the media to say, well, yeah, that looked really bad. Well, if that was the case, you knew it was occurring at the time. Why didn't you say anything? It's more evidence of their corruption. They didn't say anything because they're less important. They find it less important to report the news and to show actual corruption by people in power than they want to have their side win. They're just mouthpieces for the establishment Democrats. So that's the story as it's going, and I'll link all the stuff. Now, if you really want to get in depth on all of this, I recommend you check out my 55-minute video that was the second to last video I did, and you can check out my 2-hour live stream that I did yesterday that kind of gets into the weeds, specifically talks about these articles and the specifics that they're mentioning so you can get a bigger idea of it. But I just close you with this. Remember, we have no idea what was said by this whistleblower. There's a lot of good information, even from Democratic sources, that it wasn't a quid pro quo, that actually it turns out that it might have been the Ukrainians that were reaching out trying to get this evidence and this investigation to the United States. So it wasn't just Trump asking, it was Trump saying, yes, we want you to give us this information, when the Ukraine president, who, by the way, is an anti-corruption populist that was a stand-up comedian, so he's not like some career corrupt criminal. They wanted to give that evidence to the United States. We don't know the truth. That's what you could take away from this. But what we do know is the truth of the Biden situation. His son worked for a corrupt oligarch. A prosecutor was, at least on paper, looking into that. Biden threatened to withhold $1 billion until that prosecutor was fired. That prosecutor was fired, and the investigation into Biden's son was ultimately dropped. Nothing came of it. Now the new prosecutor is starting to relook at that information and thinks he sees evidence that needs to be investigated that could be potential corruption. So, hey, thanks everyone for watching this video. I know it went a little long, but I think this is a huge issue that we should be talking about. And you don't see people break it down that much when you watch the mainstream news. If you like this video, this is what I try to do in this channel. I was more calm in this video than I normally am, but I don't have high production value. I am trying to work on that stuff and eventually get it. But I really just want to bring the facts and my opinions on those facts as much as possible. So please consider subscribing to me and recommend me to some other people if you would. You could also follow me on BitChute. And I'll put a link below, but it's at Robert Knorr on BitChute, and at Twitter at Knorr Robert at Twitter. So thanks everyone, and look forward to me putting out some new material as the week goes on, and have a good one.